O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. I can't even begin to count the books I've read or tried to read, or the awful sermons I've heard that express either the belief or the desire that science and religion are just two sides of the same coin. They are not. But apart from that, today I'm going to talk about one thing they actually do have in common. I've even given this sermon a title in honor of the people I'm about to introduce you to, Blondeau and the bank robber. So back in about 1903, there was a chap named René Blondeau, a B-L-O-N-D-L-O-T if you're going to go look him up. A big name in physics at that time, living in France in the city of Nancy. He was a member of the French Academy of Science and very well respected. Now, up to this time, he, like a lot of other researchers, was experimenting with X-rays. It was a time in science when new things were being discovered all the time, and even relatively obscure scientists could become celebrities overnight because of what they'd found. Blondeau climbed aboard that bandwagon in 1903 by announcing that he discovered what he dubbed N-rays, a new kind of radiation that didn't seem to be like anything else known to science at the time. He published his findings, even a book, and for that he got international acclaim. But some of his claims about the new N-rays seemed to be off the charts bonkers in terms of how physics was understood to work. And here in America, Professor Irving Langmuir and his colleagues in upstate New York read it all and collectively scratched their heads. Langmuir sent one colleague, R.W. Wood, over to France to observe Blondeau's lab and to see what he could make of these claims. One steamer trip later, Blondeau welcomes Dr. Wood and gets the full tour and experiments of the experiments and his equipment. So far, so good. The experiment that day involved using a prism to look at the spectrum of the N-rays. It's the same idea as when you get a glass prism and you use it to take white light from the sun or something like that, and it divides it into colors and you can observe the colors. It's the same kind of effect. Now I'm going to digress for just one moment here to explain how I came to know all of this. Back when the Earth was very young, I was one of a group of graduate students in a lab run by Professor Joe Verdian. And one thing that Joe took very seriously was the integrity of the work we did there. He never wanted to have to answer the question, why did you give that loser a Ph.D.? Now, Langmuir gave a talk in 1953 titled Pathological Science, and this featured Blondeau's story. It was required reading for all of us, and Joe made us understand why. Okay, back to the lab in France. Now, they had the prism set up with his newfangled N-ray generator on a long table with a paper strip at the far end. One could then observe the spectrum of the N-rays and record the results by measuring their positions on the paper. Oh, but I forgot to mention that this could only be done in near complete darkness. Et voila! The lights are turned down and everybody waits until their eyes become accustomed to the dark. The N-rays are switched on and the measurements begin. As they read off the positions down to the tenths of a millimeter, Wood asks how the lines are so distinct, since the optical layout of Blondeau's equipment, as Wood had observed it, wasn't capable of such accuracy. Blondeau assured Wood that this is just one of the fascinating things about N-rays. They don't obey the normal laws of science. In the dark, the testing continued. But after a while, Wood noticed, just barely, that the prism was not sitting properly in its holder. More. So unseen, he reached over and removed the prism and put it in his pocket. The test continued with data that was highly repeatable and with great accuracy. When the lights went back on, Wood extracted the prism from his pocket and explained what he did and why. Blondeau tried to postulate new laws of science on the spot, but it's too late. The jig was up. And Blondeau's reputation and career vanished with the imaginary in-rays. From what we know from all of this, Blondeau fell for what was called a threshold phenomenon. It's like when you enter your bedroom in complete darkness and are feeling for the light switch. If you turn your head in that direction, you might even seem to make out a faint outline of it on the wall. But that's not what's happening. The optical processing unit sitting atop your shoulders can take the smallest light input and build its outline in your mind. You believe that you can see it, but your beliefs have just outrun reality. Blondeau's belief in the existence of in-rays took over and shut down his rational, scientific mind. The second story involves my time spent as a chaplain in our county jail system. An inmate out at Elmwood put in a request to see a chaplain, and it was my turn to go. The inmate turned out to be in his 30s or 40s, well-spoken, and more of a white-collar criminal than a hardened thug. We chatted for a while, and mostly I just listened. Now, being a chaplain has three main components. First, there's listening with just enough feedback to make sure you're not missing anything. Then there's talking, compassionately, one hopes, about reality. In the jails, the realities aren't always obvious to the inmate, so the chaplain can help by preparing the inmate for what might lie ahead. The third component is prayer, or whatever the inmate seems to need. People need to know that God's representative is helping connect the inmate's world to God. He told me about his crime. Actually, a fairly simple story. He was out of work, needed money, and robbed a bank. He knew he'd likely get caught, but what if he didn't? I guess he assumed that it was all worth the risk. I ran through the most likely reality that he faced: an arraignment, an offer from the DA of a plea bargain, a short trial, and most likely some prison time. He had a family, so all of this needed to be understood by them too. In the jails, that was just reality. Actually, he told me that he wasn't all that worried. He'd heard about something that could help him, and heard about it on the outside as well as from other inmates, especially the more evangelical ones. It was called the Prayer of Jabez. Now, in the early 2000s, I'd heard of it, so had most folks, but this was the first person I'd encountered who was putting it to the test. You might remember that fad too. It mostly made a lot of money for a bunch of unscrupulous hucksters selling Jabez merchandise. It's a quote from 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 10. Jabez called upon the God of Israel, saying, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from hurt and harm." And God granted what he asked. Okay, I could agree with him that, of course, anything can happen, but I added that just in case, he should prepare himself for a worst-case outcome. He could always celebrate if things turned out better, but he was considering turning down the plea bargain and pleading not guilty, so the worst case was likely to be the longest prison sentence available. No, he was a true believer in that prayer. I met with him right before his trial, and he was still upbeat and optimistic. I arranged to meet with him when he got back from court, too. Well, his demeanor was no longer cheerful and optimistic, but about as sorrowful as a person can get. I asked him how it went, and he confirmed that, yes, he got the maximum sentence. He shook his head from time to time and saying that he had prayed the prayer of Jabez over and over, and that he'd really come to believe in its power. So sad. Well, you can't tell him what a foolish thing that was. You just listen and try to help him begin facing a new reality. Like Blondelot, his beliefs cut off his ability to think rationally. Now, whether we're religious or not, we all tend to use words like belief or faith a lot. And I think we do so without thinking about what they actually mean. And interpretations of their meaning can vary from one person to the next, just complicating everything just that much more. But this is a topic to which I have given a lot of thought for many years. So today, let me offer you my insights. Beliefs, I think, come in two basic flavors, though there ought to be only one. First, and most desirable to me anyway, are our rational or conditional beliefs. These can be held by anyone given either a rational understanding of the past reliability of what is believed, or they can be held conditionally, understanding that belief relies at some point on proof. For example, I believe my car will start today so I can go home. It always has started normally, but if something goes wrong and I call AAA, I'll have more doubts next time I need to go somewhere. Second are the unconditional beliefs. Here we deny the need for proof. We even actually shield those beliefs from the danger of being debunked in order to avoid losing them. Most often such beliefs take the form of doctrine, whether it's religious or secular. And as such, the doctrines themselves cannot exist, cannot function and control the actions of their believers without such unconditional beliefs. The problem for all beliefs is that all beliefs are ultimately conditional. Blondelot and the bank robber embraced belief in things that they protected from challenges and therefore believed unconditionally. In the end, everything fell apart. Then there's faith. Faith is what we call our unconditional beliefs when we accept that actually proving or disproving them is pretty much impossible. In that way, our faith in something belongs to us alone as individuals, and only we can embrace it or challenge it. Where things get muddy is when we use the word faith to mean something else, like the outline of faith in our prayer book. When you actually read it, you'll see that it's actually an outline of doctrine. Calling it faith just warns us not to challenge it or disbelieve it. As an object lesson, do a search for the life of one Giordano Bruno. The Inquisition had him burned at the stake in 1600 for merely challenging, among other things, the doctrine of the Trinity, of virgin birth, and for saying that the earth goes around the sun. After the death of Jesus, Christianity went in many different directions, but it was always connected most directly with the poorest and least educated people in Rome's empire. The aristocratic pagan cult that ruled the empire at first worried about them as a sect within Judaism, then as a new mystery cult outside of Judaism, and then as a growing threat to the empire. They were growing at a rate of about 40% per decade by some estimates. By Constantine's time, they would be approaching half the empire's population. And they were resisting everything Rome forced on them to make them peacefully oppressed members of that empire. But you see, the folks at the top failed to remember that the social pyramid gets bigger the further down you go. And about 50% of the population was hovering close enough to poverty to find Christianity a good alternative to what they'd been doing. They were resisting Roman oppression just by being Christians, not by starting insurrections, and that, they were told, relied on faith. Justification by faith alone. That's what it's called. That meant that they didn't have to do anything but to accept the doctrines set down by a handful of leaders. The creed we recite together after each sermon is there to indicate that little has changed since those ancient times. And so, just for today, just for today, as you join in repeating the creed, ask yourself whether any part of it calls you to do anything meaningful to improve our world. In other words, at what point does anything we believe force us to act, to do something, anything, and to do it consistently? What are the things that you believe? Forget the rest of this stuff. What are the things that you believe that can do that? What Jesus started with the peasants in Galilee required active participation. The great commandments demanded it. But if you find that what we say we believe makes no such demands, think about instead what you yourself believe that will call you to the task of making this world a better place, a true kingdom of God. So my gift to you for today, questions, hard questions that need answers, the kind of answers that will guide us as we navigate our very uncertain futures together. Amen.